Hello, hello. In this video, we're going to talk about the 4 ES6 things that you should know before jumping into JavaScript. And the cool thing about this is these are 4 ES6 things that don't just work in React. These are 4 things that are need to know across the board if you want to work in React, Vue, Angular, or just vanilla JavaScript. So let's get started. All right, number 1 is let and const. Now, let and const are new ways to declare variables. ES6 came out in 2015. ECMAScript 2015 is its official name. So it's been around a while now, but I don't actually see too many people using let and const just yet. Let's open up a code pen here. And I have a code pen. All we have is JavaScript and our console here. And if you want, you can so this is what you normally see. You can click console and open up the console. And this is what we're going to be working in. So here I can say console.log hello, and that should console over here. There we go. Now let's talk about variable creation in JavaScript. Normally, when you create a variable, and this is maybe what you have been taught in the past, you do var person is equal to Chris, right? So we're taking a string and assigning it to a variable named person. Now var has been the default way that we declare variables up until now. Now we have let and const. So this would actually change to be let person equal Chris. We can also change this to const person equals Chris. And you may be wondering, what are the differences between let and const? And the differences is pretty simple. Let basically says that this is going to be reassigned. Person, we will reassign person. It could change the value of it. Const means that this person will always stay Chris. So we cannot reassign person. And to prove that, we can say person is equal to Nick. Now let's try to console.log person, and then notice that nothing will happen in our console. And that's because if we have a const person and we try to reassign it like we did here, person is equal to Nick now, if we right click, inspect element, go to our console, down here you'll see an error. Let me zoom in here. You'll see an error that says assignment to constant variable type error here. So that means you can't reassign a const. And if we change this to let, everything will work just how we expect it to, because let allows variables to be reassigned. So now Nick is what gets console logged out. So you may be wondering, okay, let and const are cool, but are they better than var? Let is pretty much essentially the same as var. There are a couple different things like how let and const are only local scope. I don't want to get too far into that. We'll save that for another video. But let and const make our code a little bit more verbose. So if I see a let, I automatically know, hey, this value will be reassigned and we may change it in the future. For const, you know that, hey, this value cannot be reassigned, and JavaScript will actually throw an error and say, hey, you are trying to reassign something that should not be reassigned. So really, I would recommend using const or let instead of var. Personally, I don't use var at all anymore. And that's just because let and const let me know as the coder, as somebody that reads somebody else's code, what is going to happen in that code. So that's let and const. That's number 1. Let's move on to number 2, which is arrow functions. Now, if we create a function in JavaScript, it'll look something like this. Function, say hello, right? And then we can say console.log saying hello. Now that we have this function, nothing's going to run because we haven't actually used it. So now we say hello, and here is saying hello. Now let's change this around so that we can use the new arrow functions in ES6. So the arrow functions are going to look a little bit different. They will look like this. Const say goodbye is equal to a function arrow here, console.log saying goodbye. Okay, so you may be wondering, this changes the syntax a little bit. What is the benefit of doing an arrow function over the default function? So really what we're doing here is we are creating a function, right? And then we are assigning it to a variable called say goodbye. Here, we're just making a function named say hello. And here, we're actually making a function and assigning it to say goodbye. So there's a little bit of a syntactic difference there. As far as how they run, these are going to run pretty much the same. Say goodbye. There we go, saying hello, saying goodbye. Let's clear out our console. Now, the cool thing about this is let's change these out. Let's do function add, and let's do A and B. So we're going to take two things and return A plus B. So if we say add 1, 2, we should get 3. Actually, we need to console.log this somewhere. So let's do const added number is equal to that. And then we will console.log so that we can see what the number is, added number. Now we have 3 showing in the console, exactly what we expected. So how does this change with arrow functions? There's a cool thing we can do with arrow functions called an implicit return. So this is currently 3 lines. You can actually change this to be 1 line, and I'll show you how. We say const add is equal to AB, arrow function, and that works the exact same way. So this is what's called an explicit return, where we actually explicitly write return. Arrow functions also give us something called an implicit return, where all we have to do is just do that right there. Anything after the arrow is implicitly returned. We don't have to actually write the word return, and this will work the exact same way. So I find myself doing this a lot in my code. I'm just turning everything into like 1-line functions wherever I can. The other thing to know about arrow functions is that it changes the scope of your function. It also changes what is called this in your function. So let's remove all this. We're going to create const person is equal to an object, name is equal to Chris, and then say hello is a function on this object. So it is a method, console.log, this.name. So this, in this scenario, refers to this object, right? This person, and this.name will automatically show Chris. So if I said person.sayhello, it would console.log Chris. Now, since we're using a normal function, and if you're confused about this syntax, this is also with ES6. It's called an enhanced object literal, which basically means normally in ES5, we would have to do something like this. Say hello is a function. This would work the exact same way. Now, with ES6, we can just write the method directly on the object, like this, and that will work the exact same way. But now let's turn this into an arrow function. So let's do this. Actually, before we do this, let's guess at what this .name will be. So normally this refers to the object. .name points to this property here. With an arrow function, it actually changes the scope of this function. So instead of this referring to this object, this now points to whatever is outside of this object. So since we don't have anything .name outside of this object, it may not work. But it looks like CodePen already has a variable outside of this function somewhere in its global scope, like up here. CodePen has code that is probably like const name is equal to CodePen. And that's what this refers to as anything outside of this object now, since this is an arrow function. So that's just something to be aware of, is that the arrow function changes this to be whatever is outside of the function. And the cool thing about arrow functions is we can actually one-line this whole thing. There we go. And it would work the exact same way. So that's arrow functions in a nutshell. It is a different way to write functions. So just be aware that when you see both, that they are both functions. Whether you should pick or choose one or the other, it really depends on the situation. If I can turn it into a one-liner, I will usually reach for the arrow function. Other times, if it doesn't really matter that I can one-line it, and the scope of the arrow function doesn't really matter, I will use the word function because I think that is a little bit more readable. It just comes with practice and seeing how it works and then what your personal preferences are. We are going to be talking about classes in number 3. Now, classes are used very often in React. So if we come back over here, delete all this, clear this out. I don't know if we'll need the console. We may have to close it. In our JavaScript, I already have the React script and the React DOM script. Therefore, we can use React in here. So I'll save and close. As we did in the beginner React article, we created a function, and basically we said function app and we return our template. So div hello is our template. And then down here, we did a React DOM.render app. And then we have to put this inside of a div. I don't think I have one just yet, so let me go and create one in our HTML. Div ID root. Okay, so now we have to render our app in that root. We're going to say document.getElement by ID root. Oh, no semicolon there. Let's close console. And there we have hello, which is our app. Now, this is a way to define a React component using a function. But I do want you to be aware of declaring React components as classes, because classes have been very prominent in React for the past few years, and you will see a lot of classes in React if you look at any project, really. So let's turn this into a class. We're going to say class app extends react.component. And the way we put the template inside of a React component that is a class, we say render, which is a method on this class. We're going to return out of here the div hello. And this is how we're going to create our React component using a class. Let's clear out the console. I think those are old errors. Let's actually close the console. We don't need it anymore. Now I want to do a little bit more on our class. We're going to create state is equal to an object. And let's say message is equal to hello, I am the message. Now we can show that down in our render using JSX. We say this.state.message. And notice that this refers to the class itself. So now we see our message here. The next thing I want to do, and this is going to be a little bit closer to our example about updating a message, just like we did in the previous examples. We have this.state.message. Let's wrap that in an H1. Let's create a button that will do on click, and let's leave that blank for now. Update message. Okay, let's move things around. And then this is going to say this.update message. Let's spread out our button here. There we go. Now this points to this, which is our class, and a method called update message. But we haven't created that yet. So we have to go here and say update message is equal to an arrow function. And now we can say console.log updating our message. So let's open up the console again. If I click this button, will it fire? Yes, it does, updating our message. Now to update this message, our class component here has a special function that React gives us called this.setState, and we want message to be my new message. Let's delete the console.log. We don't need that anymore. So let's talk about this. As soon as I click this button, it'll run this.update message. And this.update message will run our special function called setState. And we're basically saying, hey, message, update that to be my new message. All right, let's see if it works. Update message, my new message. That works perfectly. And we're going to do a lot more examples in a future article about the differences between React classes and React functions. I just want you to be aware of this syntax because you will see it often in the React world. So the class syntax is something I want you to be aware of, and we will definitely talk about it further. It just makes us appreciate the the function way of doing this, which was a little bit cleaner in our previous example. Let's move on to the fourth and final ES6 thing that you should know, which is destructuring. Now, destructuring, I've seen a lot of people get confused about. I want to take it back to a place where it's not in the React syntax. I just want to do vanilla JavaScript destructuring. So let's delete all this. We don't need any of that anymore. Let's bring the console back. Here we go. Clear that out. Okay, so destructuring is a way to pull variables outside of an object or an array quickly. Destructuring may be a fancy word, may be confusing, but it basically is to pull data out of an object. Let's create an object, const person is equal to name is Chris, Twitter is Chris on code. Okay, so we have this variable called person, which is an object. We have two properties on it, name and Twitter. Let's pull the name and the Twitter out of this person object. We're going to say const name is equal to person.name. Const Twitter is equal to person.twitter. Now we can console.log, let's say name and Twitter. And those will be two separate variables, Chris and Chris on code. Now I know this isn't the most practical example. You may not have anything this simple in the real world, but it is very common to pull variables outside of an object. But let's say we had multiple things, right? Let's say you're pulling out an address out of an object. This could turn into like address 1, city, country. So this could actually turn into a long process. Destructuring solves that. It came with ES6. It solves this by actually letting us pull variables out of the object like this. Const name and Twitter is equal to person. So that basically just says create a variable called name, create a variable called Twitter, and pull those out of person. And this object syntax here is how we destructure out of an object. Therefore, name and Twitter work the exact same way. So whenever you see something like import render from React DOM, that's basically saying, hey, I'm going to pull the render function out of the React DOM object. That's why you'll sometimes see people do this, React DOM.render, like that. Or you'll sometimes see them pull the render out and then actually just call render by itself. And that's because we're pulling the method directly out of React DOM. But if you don't, you can actually always use React DOM.render. Another example of that is when we did class app extends react.component. You can actually destructure component out of the React library. You can say import component from React. And now we don't have to do that. We can do that. The last thing to look at is array destructuring, which is kind of new because React hooks that came out recently has totally adopted array destructuring. Let's look at how we can do that. Let's create an array called people is equal to an array of Chris and Nick. And let's clear this out right now. So normally to get each one of these, you would say const person1 is equal to people 0, since array started 0. Const person2 is equal to people 1. Now we can console.log person1, person2, and we have Chris and Nick. Now this can definitely get really long since arrays are known to be pretty long in JavaScript if you have a lot of data, which a lot of our apps do. What we can do here is we can actually just pull each one out and say const person1, person2 is equal to people. And this syntax is the way to pull out information out of an array, but the object we were pulling out per property, in an array you pull it out in the order that it shows up in the array. So this is going to be the first position right here. This is going to be second position right here. If we had a third one for Ryan, and then we had here person 3 would be Ryan. Now you don't have to name these person 1, person 2, person 3. You can actually say Chris, Nick, if you know what is coming out of this array, Ryan, and then let's just copy this right here and paste it right there. And we get the same effect here. So that is array destructuring. Where you will see that in React is you will see it when we use state. And you've seen that before in our previous example where we do const message set message is equal to use state, and then you pass in a default there. So use state is a function that basically returns an array where the first part is the data, and then the second part is a function to update the data. And that's just a quick walkthrough of what array destructuring is. I just want you to be aware of object destructuring and array destructuring when you see it, because you'll see that a lot in modern day JavaScript. Okay, so that wraps up the 4 ES6 things to know when we're working with JavaScript, especially in React. These will carry over to your Vue, Angular, and vanilla JavaScript skills, so they are very good to know. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.